Uh, Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you guys today. My name is Jason Conley. I'm the president of HOTB Software. We are a software development company that has been around since 2008. We actually got our start in the government space. One of the largest programs we worked on was the Hardest Hit Fund. That was a Treasury-funded program where they allocated a little over $8 billion to 18 states to develop mortgage assistance programs during the last financial crisis. Of those 18 states, 14 of those, were clients of ours, but we were able to appropriate a little over $6 billion through our systems as part of that program. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program is very similar to that program in terms of the back-end workflow. Meaning that there are applications that need to be reviewed, vetted for eligibility, document collection process. There's an underwriting and approval process, and then the ultimate funding and disbursement of those monies to the appropriate parties. The ERA program is similar, but with a little bit different front ends. What we're doing is taking our historically platform that was utilized in other programs, those back-end functionalities, and putting on a new front end to where it is both a tenant and landlord-centric model. And what I mean by that is, we envision developing a front-end portal outlined here, where they would come to a homepage. They would be able to select either that they were a tenant or that they were a landlord. We recommend a series of pre-screening questions to kind of weed out those that clearly aren't eligible. Those that do not meet the criteria would not be allowed to create an application and be referred to other resources. Those that do meet the criteria would be allowed to go through and begin their application process, create their account, go through the series of intake steps, be able to download their application and documents, be able to e-sign those if necessary, upload any other documents that might be needed to validate their situation. And then from a landlord's perspective, they could then invite their tenants. And then similarly on the same side, tenants would go through a similar process with the ability to invite their landlords. And once those were both parties applied, we would be able to connect those on the back end and group those together. Following that, they would be, primarily accessing their homepage to get status updates about their landlords or update additional documents or recertifications, which I'll get into in just a moment. So that platform in and of itself really is designed for the front-end intake. So this is an example of one of those that we created. This was specific to the Hardest Hit Fund, which we worked on, I talked about. But I'm initially going to log in as a state administrator and show you those tools that are available. If I can type in my password correctly, that is. A number of different tools here. We're not going to get into all of those today because we're limited on time, but primarily within this, you're working within your application list. So this would be, we'd have two pipelines or two different tabs. You could switch between landlords and tenants. And within those, you could, have various different processes and tracking of that information. These columns here represent the date the application was created, the first and last name of the applicant, their customer ID number. This column here, HHF, we would actually change this to ERA, but this represents all the different eligibility rules that we would run in conjunction with this application. So you will see pass, fail, and then there's some blank and TBD. The blanks and TBD mean that we have not received enough information to actually determine eligibility, so we just leave those blank or to be determined. But if the file does fail eligibility, we can actually go over here to the notepad. I can see there's a little red asterisk on there. I can pull up that information and see what they actually failed, what eligibility requirements. So for this particular program, it wasn't owner occupied and wasn't their primary residence. So that was the reason for that failure. Going along, county, and again, these can be configured, so whatever information you want to demonstrate can be listed here, but county was important for this. You also have the ability to select which program. In this case, it could be rental assistance or utility assistance or both. You guys may have other buckets of money that you want to include as well. But really, this gives you an idea to kind of segment these applications at the beginning to help translate to other downstream reporting later on. You have the ability to assign this to a counselor or processor. This information, once assigned, when they log in, they only have access to their case files and no one else's. So it's kind of a separation security thing, but also limit them and focus in on just their pipeline. This status here, this is totally configurable. This should be in conjunction with what your status looks like and how that information is being processed within your own facility. And next is last milestone. This is a representation of where the applicant is in the application process. So typically we take the application, we break it up into multiple steps. That makes it easier for the applicant to complete. But here you can see PDF1 is actually the terminal status, meaning that application went through the full process and the applicant was able to download their PDF and upload their documentation. View record I'll get to in just a moment. Files, this represents the number of file attachments associated with that record, and then there's a number of different functions. View record I want to talk about right now. So this gives the processor the ability to go in and see the application from the applicant's perspective. So if they need to help them through a certain section and they need to validate information, they can go through and review that with the applicant or on their own. But as I click on view record, you'll notice here it says now I'm logged in as the selected customer, and click OK. This is the applicant's name. They can go ahead and manage their own password. But more importantly here, we can see the application broken into different steps. This again is important for efficiency purposes, allows them to come in, complete this information, and then come back and save that or continue on to the next step. But they can do this in pieces if necessary, because they may not have all the information available to them when they initially start their application. And they would simply just go through this process of entering the information until they got to the final step where they would download their application. And this represents, again, totally customized based on your program, but disclosures, could be acknowledgements, certifications, other things they may need to sign or acknowledge, as well as, all that applicant information we would populate here as well. And typically have them sign that. But more importantly, the other thing, once they go through that and they've completed all those steps, they're really just essentially waiting to hear back on what happened with their application. And so one of the things we created was this little button here, check my current status. This is really useful for you in terms of cutting down on those customer service calls. It allows you to communicate and interact directly with the applicant. This gives them information on, who they're assigned to, who's working on their file, what their current status is. You also have the ability to send them messages directly. So these are personal messages that you can send that, maybe you need updated bank statements, or maybe there's an additional piece of information that you need from them. This allows you to, communicate with them directly. And then we give, what does your status mean? So funded means the state's begun making payments on your behalf. What happens at this stage, and then what happens next. And so, all that really manages their expectations and keeps them apprised of, what's happening. And so again, just another useful tool to have available. Once I'm done here, I can actually click return to admin. This is going to bring me back to my applicant list. Now that I'm in here, for the most part, we're trying to get all these files through and get them over to an underwriter. And so that process starts obviously with those screening questions on the front end, and then trying to triage those applicants as best we can. So as a processor, typically what you're doing is you're validating eligibility and you're making sure that all the appropriate documentation is in place. So with the magnifying glass, I can drill down. I can look at all this detailed information. I can look at their all their inputs that they created on the front end. I have the ability to go through and look at all of their files, download those as might be necessary. And then I can also create an action plan. And so this is really, specific to your program. It identifies, whether or not they're getting or being recommended for rental assistance, utility assistance, or both. It's identifying those amounts. What is their rental payment? When does their lease expire? How many payments are they behind? Is there a reinstatement or a rearage payment that needs to be made? Same thing with the utilities, who are their providers. Give you the ability to document all of that information and validate it. Along with account numbers or other identifying information that the party receiving the payment will need in order to reconcile those. We can run other calculations as well, so whether it's debt to income or AMI, represent that information here. But again, this is really kind of the processor confirming all that information and then ultimately submitting that on to underwriting. Before I move to underwriting, I just want to point out a couple other tools. We do have a communication log. This is direct communication between the processor and underwriter. So if there is necessary dialogue back and forth, they can do that here. We date and timestamp that for accountability and audit purposes. And then every time a note is entered, the other party will actually receive an email notification. So it kind of reminds them of what's coming up so they can stay on top of that. The other thing I want to show is a recertification log. Oftentimes what happens, especially in these programs where there's future payments being scheduled, you want to confirm probably on a quarterly basis that applicant is still eligible for the program. So remember on the front end where we showed the check my status, similarly, every quarter we would highlight, send an email to the applicant, direct them back to the portal, tell them that they need to recertify for continued assistance. They'd be able to go in, there'd be a button next to check my status that said recertification. They'd click on that, make any acknowledgements that were necessary, upload any additional documentation that might be required, and then submit that. And so this actually tracks that here so you can view and see that information and validate their recertification process. Now, once I'm ready to submit a file over to underwriting, I would actually go over here, this little icon that looks like an envelope with a red arrow. This is how I submit this to underwriting. I had the ability to set different urgency flags here. So this could be, maybe my 80% AMI or my 50% AMI, identify all that information and be able to export that package over to underwriting. I'm now going to log out of here and log into underwriting to show you what that process looks like and the tools that are available to the underwriter. So again, very similar view, but primarily working within that applicant list. Again, you'll notice here the pipeline is slightly different. We have the urgency flags again, so this could mark those applications that needed special handling or expedited, expedited processing. Date registered, this is the date they came over from, or came over to underwriting. Again, the customer name. Servicer and agency may not be as relevant for you. If there's other information you want listed here, we could certainly display that. But primarily you would assign that to an underwriter and they'd be able to go through and select their status accordingly. The underwriter, though, once they get this file, they can validate that information, validate that it's complete, and then be able to go in and begin the approval process. So we're capturing some basic information up top, maybe verifying their HMDA information, their different reporting requirements. Here you can see the communication log from the underwriter's side. But ultimately what they're going to do is they're going to go down here to the funding section and they're going to reserve funds for that individual. And they're going to identify, so is this a reinstatement? Is this monthly payments or utility reinstatement or utility payments and how that process goes. So let's say maybe I'm 6 months behind on my rent and maybe it's $1,000 a month. So I'm going to reserve $6,000 for reinstatement. And then I'm also going to reserve, 6 months worth of payments going forward. So I get my 12-month maximum payments allocated to me. So what this does, it does a couple things. It sets aside these funds, subtracts them out of what is available within the program. And this is really important to make sure that you're not approving people that you don't have money to fund. Really key as your program begins to wind down. Not so important in the beginning, but you really need to track it all the way through. And then you also have the ability to generate a welcome letter, an approval letter to identify, hey, you've been approved for the program. Here's the amount of assistance you're receiving and the date those payments are going to begin. and you can generate those directly from the system. Next, you actually have what you do next is set up your payment tables. So this is where I would actually come in and identify and say, okay, February 1st, I'm going to make that first $1,000 payment. I'm also going to do my reinstatement on February 1st, that's $6,000 payment. And then going forward, I can just copy those other amounts. I can just copy everything over. So this would be my March 1st payment. This would be my April 1st payment, my May 1st payment, and so on, and be able to capture and set all that up. Now, once I save this information as an underwriter, I'm pretty much done with this file. I should not have to go back and touch it unless there's a need for additional assistance. Maybe they need the extra 3 payments. Or something else comes up where maybe they weren't using utility support before, but now they've fallen behind on utilities, so that you can go back in. But for the most part, once you set up these payment tables, you can pretty much leave this file alone until you're ready to close it out at the end of program. So once I'm done with that, I actually go back here and go to the next file. That brings up the next step in the process, which is where we actually go in and look at the different types of reporting capabilities. And within the reports, we can see here you can access a number of different things, whether it's application reports, eligibility reports. We can actually pull up pool management reports. This will identify, how many funds have been reserved, how much has been dispersed, how many is left. What the overall frequency is and accountability for those different amounts, and be able to track your program that way and see how things are running. We also have the ability to pull up our payments. So I can go in and review all my upcoming payments. And so this will list every applicant that's receiving a payment, who it's going to. So in this case, this could be, one landlord that has 9 different tenants. So although I may be sending a check to that landlord for $11,000, each of those individual payments are broken out separately for audit reporting purposes. Once I mark these as paid, I can then export that information and pull that directly into your servicing or accounting system for the disbursement of those payments. And so we feed those payments directly to you. We also have 1098 reporting. We have other exports. And you can also pull up, the full Treasury report itself. So this is typically required as part of these federal programs. The Treasury wants to know on a quarterly basis where this money is going to, who's been approved, who's been denied, and the demographics of those individuals. And so we have a lot of experience in creating these. We've been sending these reports to the Treasury and the White House for over a decade. And this is actually a fairly complex report. You can tell by the length of time it takes to run it, all the different calculations. But it's, identifying who's receiving, who's been denied, who's been withdrawn, how many are in process, breaking down income percentages, as well as AMI percentages. You can have county breakdowns by count, as well as the other HMDA, race, ethnicity information that's required to be reported along with this program as well. So as you can see, the system itself is fairly complex, but it's well thought out. It's a tried and true process that really is focused on efficiency. So from the very front end, using pre-screening questions to weed out those people that obviously aren't eligible, then allowing the processor to get to those applications that are completed, that have submitted all their documentation, so they can get them through the process, be able to set those urgency flags and identify in their action plan what their recommendations are, giving the underwriter the tools they need to be able to reserve those funds, as well as set up those payments, and then giving senior staff and administrators the ability to actually fund those and have the reporting capabilities to document everything that's going on and have that transparency and accountability. I know that was a lot. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose there. So at this point, I'll pause for questions and let me know if you guys if you want to revisit anything. Thank you.